Hello, I'm Sarah Gander, pediatrician from St. John, New Brunswick, here with your faculty development podcast for Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick. Today, I welcome Dr. Wendy Stewart, pediatric neurologist, and we're going to talk about defining wellness and why it's important to learn how to handle the stress in this career of medicine. Learning to say no, and is technology helping or hurting the efficiency and wellness of us in medicine? Join me with Wendy today. Okay, so today on the podcast, we're going to welcome Dr. Wendy Stewart, who is also a member of my department of pediatrics as a pediatric neurologist. She's also the director of humanities at Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick, but actually comes to us in Canada from Dundee, Scotland, where she moved in 1982 to complete her PhD, and then went on to medicine at Calgary and to the IWK for her training in pediatric neurology. She dared to skip over the border to Maine for a little while and quickly retreated back to Canada, I guess. I don't know if that says something more about them or more about us, but we're certainly very happy to have Wendy here today. And the topic today is really about physician wellness. And it's very topical for us right now in our medical community, and certainly with some recent publications and notes in the CMAJ and otherwise about physician suicide, addictions. And I don't think you can go to a conference now that doesn't have a session on wellness or burnout. So thankfully that is the case. It's becoming more top of mind. So welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
Wendy, when we look at the definition of wellness, and when we speak about patients, we certainly talk about wellness is not just the absence of disease. And so when we think about ourselves and our right, if you will, to feel well despite the demands in our field, why do you think it's important to talk about that?
I think there's a number of different reasons. One of the things I also do is I teach mental health first aid, and we do talk about that continuum of wellness. So people can have a physical illness but still be very well in themselves. And I think it's really important in terms of your overall well-being to be talking about it, because if we push and push and push ourselves, then we're not going to be as effective as physicians, and our quality of life from a personal perspective just won't be very good.
Yeah, and I think people say a lot of the times, I don't know, what's the expression? You can't drink from an empty cup. Basically, I think we all recognize that it's very difficult to provide good health care and support if we ourselves don't feel well. But at the same time, that just seems like do people just eye roll at that and say like, yeah. Easy to say.
I think they do, because people feel pressured. And it's interesting, I was just speaking to a friend who's a yoga teacher, and he was saying that in yoga, they talk about this, that if you say you don't have time to come for a half-hour yoga session, then actually you should be coming for an hour. That notion that you should actually be taking the time because you are so stressed, to have that time out to recover and recuperate. And you actually are much more effective. I mean, I can certainly speak to that myself, that if I do take the time and go and have a break, do something fun, laugh or play music, whatever it might be, then you're actually more effective when you come back to what you want to get done.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good modeling for our students too, I tend to book my clinics right through lunch and right through till the end of the day, and that's just because, frankly, I'm trying to get home to my kids faster and get more into the day, but maybe we would have been a little bit better if we had taken even a half hour to go step outside and take some fresh air or something.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you talk about the students, because I don't think they really believe that that's so important, like to give yourself that space. And they tend to feel they have to keep going and study. But if they actually took a little break and went back, they would actually get more done and remember more.
Yeah, I remember giving a student advice. They were studying for their Royal College exams, and I probably fibbed a little bit. I probably didn't actually do this myself, but I made it sound like I had done it myself. Like I said, well, I never studied Friday night, no matter what happened, because Friday night, I was married at the time, so Friday night was sort of for my spouse, for us to restore, just rejuvenate, do something for ourselves. And so I think that's good advice. I mean, now some of our students have exams on Saturdays, so whatever the equivalent of Friday is to give yourself some space, I think is I think is really important. I mean, the CMAJ just quoted a 7 to 35% survey response for our medical students who actually have suicidal ideation.
Yeah, and to be honest, that doesn't surprise me. I think, and I'm seeing this even in my own patients, is the level of anxiety has grown exponentially for me in my practice. I watch these kids and they're the ones that are going to be coming into medicine, and I think they're finding it a lot more challenging. And so it is something we need to start talking more about because this is not going away.
I mean, you and I as pediatricians and the folks listening who think about sort of trauma-informed care and the toxic stress that we think about with patients, gosh, maybe our job is a source of kind of like repeated trauma, toxic stress. Like, what do we do to absorb those thoughts and feelings and the heaviness of the work that we do every day in a healthy, sustainable way?
Well, I think I can speak to what I do personally. I mean, I think it's really important to have space. And what I mean by that is a chance to really be away from the worry about the patients that you're seeing, or maybe that you haven't figured something out or whatever it might be, or all the paperwork you still have to get done. But having that chance to actually escape from it all and think about something completely different. So the way I do that is I play my accordion. And I'm in a couple of bands, and it's just fun because when you're there, that's all you think about is the music. And you usually have a good laugh. And I remember even when I was in training, I'd be so tired. I'd been up all night, up all day, and it'd be 6 o'clock at night, and all I wanted to do was sleep. But it was band practice, and I would make myself go. And by the end of the night, I felt great, even though I was tired. But my spirits were lifted, and I just felt good. And I've never forgotten that. And so I still maintain that, even though people think I'm crazy to do all this stuff. But it is so important to have that space because I really don't think about work.
Does it also give you something else to talk about? So like you're at the dinner party and, you know, people want to talk about their headaches or whatever, like the equivalent of my, you know, text message of their kid's dirty diaper is in the pediatric neurology world. But it gives you something else to sort of talk about and feel like you're part of, and a different community where people actually don't really care what you're up to in your doctor life.
Yeah, and what's lovely is I'm in a couple of choirs as well, and it's just you become friends with these people, and it's a totally different circle of people, and it's fun to have, as you say, a chance to talk about other things and share other experiences, and it just normalizes things that are sometimes tough. Yeah,
and I guess I should have done the introduction to that, you know, Wendy Stewart triathlete, because you also are very active physically.
Although I haven't been much lately, but that's normally...
Well, we were just commiserating over the fact that we're probably both going to punk out of the triathlon coming up. But
yeah, I love the feel of the wind on my face and on my bike, and I'm fortunate now to live on the river and to be able to get out in nature. And even on the weekend, even though it was a bit chilly, I did go out kayaking. And so to be out on the water and have that space, listen to the birds, it is just amazing. And it really is, water's my solace. I grew up by the water in Scotland, and so it's lovely to do that.
Yeah, so maybe we have this amazing advantage being here in New Brunswick of saying, you know, like, let's take this meeting to the zoo trail, or let's take this meeting to, you know, the boat and the Miramichi sort of thing. Like, maybe we actually have an enormous innovative opportunity to do even our jobs better in a more wellful. That's not with a more well focus. That's a wonderful opportunity. So what is the deal? Like, is this a new thing, do you think, that we're strung out and burn out and need to make this focus? Is it the changing face of medicine? What is it, do you think?
I think there's a number of factors that have contributed. I certainly, I mean, I feel like I'm getting old, but I'm not that old. But the thing that struck me in my career is the whole technology piece has just been exponential in terms of what's supposedly available. And I certainly got on the bandwagon of like EMRs pretty early. I was an early adopter here in New Brunswick. And my dream for what that could be has not come to fruition. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I think there's now papers coming out over the last few years about EMRs causing more stress instead of actually being an effective, use of your time. And I think the biggest issue is that I've essentially swapped a paper chart for a digital chart, and that's all it did for me, really. You can schedule and everything, and you can bill from your EMR, but it doesn't change the time that you have to do, and you still get a whole ton of paper from every source, and you still have to scan that in and get it into your chart. And so it's actually quite stressful for people, and if you're not super comfortable typing, for example, they find it actually more stressful than if they were just writing in their paper chart. And so that's one part of it. And then the other piece that I think technology has allowed us to be connected 24/7, and I think people feel like they're never away, so you're constantly bombarded, be it by text, email, whatever it is, that you have to do something. And so I never feel like we're present to one thing anymore, even in meetings or in grand rounds. If you look around, everybody's on their phone doing 10 things at once, and I just think that's very stressful for us all.
Yeah, the amount of emails is just absurd. Like, I'm department head for our department, and I've got to say that the amount of sort of fire emails, it's quite miraculous to watch when you actually go away and can't answer your email, how you watch this circle of email happen where people actually solve their own problems too, you know? So if you don't answer right away, and then you see the next email that says, well, actually, I'm going to go talk to this person. And then the next email that says, okay, so I went to talk to this person, I actually got an answer, so we don't need you to respond to any of that. And that'll happen in like the span of 8 hours. I mean, one book that I read years ago was The 4-Hour Work Week, where they talk about reasonable amount of technology use. So when to check your email,
Right.
How to, just simple things, turn off those buzzers of things that are after you. Yeah. Do you have any tricks that you do to kind of keep it at bay?
So I try to spend just a little block of time together to look at everything. Unfortunately, I do use my phone for call, and I'm on call 50% of the time. So it means it has to be available to me. But the other challenge is that when people get to know you, they call you directly, which
I've never done that. Oh, yes, I have. I've definitely done that too.
So, I mean, I'm not complaining because it's about mutual patience. I'm just saying that that's the reality, is that you have that connection all the time. And it's easy to forget for one another that you might be in with a patient or you might be doing something else. But a lot of people send me a text and say, you're free to chat, which is actually kind of nice because then it gives me the space to finish what I'm doing and then call back. Mm-hmm. Because I find, I don't know if anyone who's listening has ever read about this, but there's this notion that if you're constantly interrupted and losing your train of thought, you really can't finish things very effectively. And I mean, we've all been there. We're sitting in our office, we get interrupted and you're like, where was I? And you're trying to get back into the history again and you just totally lose your train of thought. And if you create the little blocks of time where you're uninterrupted, that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence that says that presence, like being present, is so efficient and your quality of delivery of product is so much higher. Yeah. And it changes as we get older too. Like I was much better at it when I was younger, and I blame the children that I've had for sucking out my ability to multitask. But it's also just that working memory, I think, when you're really sleep deprived and whatnot, being able to hold things in your mind. So, you know, you mentioned something about giving you space, and I just can't help but think about boundaries and how terrible we are at them. And it's the saying no thing too. So if you didn't roll your eyes at you have to fill your own bucket before you can fill other people's bucket or whatever adage you want to use, how do we help and support ourselves and others with just like saying no sometimes?
So I think we're all very similar in that regard, because we were laughing before because people say to me, you should just learn to say no. And I get this all the time. And one of my challenges is I have a lot of interests, and if it sounds really cool, I think I'd love to be involved in that and I want to do it. But it's not always feasible from a time perspective. So it's really trying to be honest with yourself. This might be fun, but is it something that's going to stress me out? One of the things I've done is I've tried to say, can you give me a few days to think about it? Rather than just saying no up front, let me think, I'd love to do it, but if this is not the right time, then I give myself space to really reflect on that and then tell them. Because that way, they know you've at least considered it and
that you just didn't sort of shut people down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful. And it also lets you be more realistic about what you can do.
Well, sometimes it's your own strategic plan. Like, that's kind of a dirty word in the administrative world, but just it's your own sense of, does this contribute to the place that I'm trying to go or what I'm trying to do? Or is it just like pure fun and it's a dopamine hit because I'm like doing a podcast with Sarah and that sounds fun and I won't bother you more than that, hopefully. But yeah, so I started coming around to it with akin to parenting or the parenting advice that I give, where people feel bad that they are restricting their child from doing something. So in my house, it's screen time. So yes, wouldn't I love to just let them watch TV all day long? A, they'd be happy. B, they're out of my hair and I can get on with my things, but it's not the right thing for their development. And so it's restriction love. So I am restricting this from you because I love you and I have compassion for your time and your mental health.
It is hard though. I think sometimes you feel pressured to do something. You know what I mean? When people are asking you, and depending on who they are, I really believe you have to do things that bring you joy and also that are fulfilling so that you feel like you've done something that really matters to you. Because then it makes it easy to do. It's easy to get up in the morning and do that if it's fun and rewarding and you really feel like you've made a difference. So for me, I try to pick stuff like that really gets me excited.
I think that like directly relates to our mental health too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like I can't remember what all the things are, but like you have to feel like you're making a difference. You have to feel like when you get up, you're not just burning the midnight oil to no effect.
That's right.
Which I think is hard in medicine because in pediatrics, we struggle with the amount of sort of mental health and behavioral stuff that we see that arguably there are many days when you think like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to move the needle on this. And then our adult colleagues are looking at chronic illness, chronic disease, this sort of thing. And family medicine, it's just a revolving door of problem after problem. It's such a busy practice. It must sometimes be hard to feel those wins.
Yeah, I think it's hard for us to allow ourselves to do the things we want to do. And you do feel pressured to just keep going and work and work and work and work and work.
Yeah. But it's like, like the paperwork pile is always there.
That's right.
It never does get better, even if you do the math, okay, if I have 100 patients on my waiting list and I just like bang out 10 other patients a week over the next 10 weeks, I should be caught up.
But it
doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
But the train just keeps coming.
Yeah.
No, and that's the reality is you forget it's continuous. So you look at your list and you think, oh yeah, I could probably do them, like just do a whole bunch of clinics all together, and it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But I do think, but giving yourself permission to say that's okay, like I can't do all that right now. And to remember you're not the only person in that child's life as well. Yeah. I think that's really important because none of us can
take that on.
Be everything. Mm-hmm. And then to be able to be okay with that is so important, I think.
Yeah, I ran into a pediatrician in Montreal one time who I liked her. She was sort of scrappy, like she was kind of a more grittier pediatrician than what you'd usually see. And she had her hand in a whole bunch of pots, right? Like she did a day doing this, day doing that, day doing this. And I was like, oh, you have one day of clinical practice where she actually has continuity. And I'm like, do you ever get criticized for not being around enough? She's like, oh my God, yeah, all the time. She said, but I could not be there at all. And so this is what I'm able to give. This is what I have. This is what my capacity is. And then you manage that and you just, I guess, manage expectations as well. I don't know, because you are a provincial service. So you are all around all the time. Yeah. And so that must be very stressful to feel like if you're around all the time, then nobody ever thinks you're anywhere for long.
Right. And so that is hard sometimes because you're in different places. And there are moments where I wake up in the morning and think, which bed am I in? And it is hard because sometimes that's tiring. But at the same time, I try to always look at it that if you're taking the care to the kids, I know it's helpful. Mm-hmm. But you do have to create some space for yourself in that as well. Yeah. And it is nice. The one thing it does do if you're traveling like that is you do get to know people better because you're there with them. So you get to have time that you may not otherwise have with other physicians, which, that can be kind of fun because you can get a chance to get to know them a little better. And so then when you're dealing with them, it really allows you to have a relationship that you can say, well, actually, I can't do that right now, or I can't. And they know you're not
just brushing them off or something.
Exactly. And I think those relationships are so important. Yeah.
I think about building our community as physicians. There's been some mention on social media and whatnot over the last little while about the, gone are the doctor's lounge times and stuff. And I know when I first came to St. John 11 years ago, and Brian Craig, who was my family doctor at the time, but also a family friend, said, Sarah, the best thing you could do is sit and have a cup of coffee at 7:30 in the doctor's lounge. And I thought, what planet are you on? First of all, I've got a life, Brian, and I want to go and have a run in the morning. And I didn't even have kids then. So you don't even realize the complexity to life after that. But at the same time, he's so right. Like, there's so much value in the moments that I do sit down with colleagues. And to bring it back to your technology point, what do we do at the beginning of meetings? Like, how often do people say, like, how was your vacation? Or how was your weekend? No, we're trying to get a few emails done.
That's right. I mean, we just can't disconnect very easily. And so that social piece has been lost in a lot of ways.
And we don't really want to hang out with each other outside of work because we see each other all day. No, I think it reminds us, though, of work, right? Like, we're sort of traumatized. Like, I'm really interested in this concept of repeated heavy trauma and toxic stress, not only, of course, in the developing child's brain, but in our ability to just have our ongoing sustainability and resilience to provide good care.
I mean, there is some, data now in the literature around those little micro stresses that go on and on and on and on and on, and that people can get post-traumatic stress disorder. I was just looking at a paper about nursing, and I think it's true for all the health professions, especially if they're involved with people with significant illness and even mental health addiction, caring for anyone that has ongoing chronic illness as well. So I do think we forget the impact that can have on us. And so for me, when I think of resilience, it's not just a case of the bending and pinging back, but you really want to grow from experiences as well and feel like somehow you're changed. So I feel like helping learners and each other to be able to do that, I think is so important.
Yeah, as an educator, we have learned now that it's less important for us to teach the didactic rote memory items, right? Yeah. Because they can find that on the internet, frankly. But for us to help our students navigate the complexities of the world of medicine, functioning in medicine, surviving medicine with these high sort of suicidal ideation rates and also addictions, And so I think that I've learned more and more about how our feelings are directed by our thoughts that really have a lot to do with our own perfectionism, our own type A personalities, our inner critic even. And so I know you think a lot about that too, and how the personalities of medicine weigh in on that.
Totally. In fact, I joke now because, you get when you start getting older, you start to get more comfortable with yourself. And I've often joked that I'm a quadruple A because I do. I've always put incredible pressure on myself, like to perform and do a good job. But you have to sometimes say, you know what, that was okay. And to actually get to that place.
The B minus work.
That's right.
Thing, that sometimes B minus is
sometimes that's good. Enough. And that's good.
Good enough is good enough.
I've always been striving, to always do the best. And sometimes you have to say, you know what, I think that was good. I think I did a good job of that, and I'll just let it go. And being able to do that. But that has not been an easy task for me to learn.
Oh, it takes a lot of practice, hey?
And to be able to impart that to the students we meet, because they're all, to have gotten into medicine, they're all such high achievers. And to give them that wisdom, they might not hear it quite yet, but if we can share that with them and be open about how hard it can be if you don't, then I think that's going to hopefully help some of them as they move along.
It's really again that hidden curriculum of modeling and just watching our behavior. I think about the 2 charts that are sitting on my desk right now that require a lot of effort on my part because it's a summary and it's related to a very complex case, and they've been sitting there for a while, and so they have infinitely and exponentially grown in like stress and burden, even though, God, it probably only would take me 20 minutes if I just would sit down and be able to focus. And And so even just talking about those things with our students and saying like, honest to God, like I just need to get these done. I'm not going into the weekend with these hanging over my head, you know, this will be good enough.
And that's the thing, like to take the time to create a short little block of time. I talk about that with my students sometimes that I'm mentoring for RIM, for example, because it can be hard to juggle all the different parts of learning and just but creating those chunks of time. So I try to do it. I try to say I'm going to just do this and I work on it and just finish it, because otherwise it drives you crazy.
Yeah, well, it's the same behavioral strategies that we teach our patients, you know. Yeah. Get a little egg timer from the dollar store and so you can, you know, I do that with my phone now and say, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to just do this. And the other trick is the 3 things that you want to get done in a day. You do those 3 things first. So then you know you've had a good day because you've done the 3 things before you check email, check messages, kind of get on that hamster wheel of your office or whatever. So, but here we are, like we're talking very openly about mental illness, about the higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation and whatnot in physicians and in healthcare providers. But yet, here we are with the stigma as thick as ever, I would say. The interface with our own ability to reach a healthcare provider, very much a barrier. I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I know MBMS does their best. And what do you think about what physicians can do? Like what's the reality?
I think we all struggle with reaching out because you're worried about what people think of you and that fear of judgment, just because we are such perfectionists and high achievers. And I mean, I can certainly attest to that myself. And so I'd love to see us create a more safe environment with our colleagues, so that not necessarily that they're going to be your therapist or counsellor, but to have people be open to being present to one another if they seem to be having a tough time. And even to just reach out in a kind way or offer a kind word, because we're often so busy that we don't do that. Or we often are quick to criticize as opposed to saying something kind. And I'd love to have people say, gosh, no, somebody told me I did a great job of this, or just at something nice, because you don't often hear that piece. And those moments of reward are also those little buzzes that keep us going.
Yeah, for sure. And as much as we need to empower and sort of train people to be able to reach out and speak for themselves, is there a place of training faculty or our colleagues about how to receive that? Because I find that the feedback, and you and I have talked about this before, the feedback is off the mark, right? So like finally you get the courage to say, I felt really down this weekend. Like I actually made a plan in my mind that if I was going to kill myself, this is how I was going to do it. And it's not an unrealistic plan. And then you get the guts to say to somebody, I was feeling really down and I actually thought about suicide. And then what do they say?
They might just blow you off because I get down as well.
Right.
And it's such a symptom for us all then, if we're not able to hear that and be present to somebody. I don't think it's easy to hear someone say that. And we certainly, if we're struggling ourselves, we're going to naturally respond in that way. But then it'd be nice if we could take a step back and think, wow, are they really in trouble? Like, do I need to maybe support them a little bit?
Yeah, we might. Yeah, like I don't know if I have the answer for it either, because it is not dissimilar to the feeling of you're seeing your patient for headaches or belly pain and then your hand's on the door and then they lay down the mental illness thing and it just becomes this, you know, for lack of a better word, additional burden to your day. And so then a colleague like your patients, you feel, okay, I have to be responsible to them. But then you kind of think like, oh God, now I've got to be responsible and worry about you. But could we work better as a community to answer that call for help?
Yeah, and I do believe we can. We're now essentially working a lot in team-based care, and even other health professionals getting to know one another and supporting one another could be, I really believe, a community of practice that has that kind of culture. And I don't mean everyone should be best buddies, because that's not realistic either, and it is nice to have friends outside of your work. but to have that safe environment that if you were having a bad day and I was on the team with you, that I would help you and pick up the slack and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thinking about the kind of dark place that this discussion went to, I think, isn't there a bright moment of hope with these interprofessional teams, with these health? So then you don't feel like as a physician, as faculty, it's all on you. So like any other major role in our lives, if you can ask for help and feel totally okay with that, that doesn't mean anything about your ability or about your, competency, that we all need help sometimes, that I think then it has that shared burden of heaviness for when we are feeling more resilient or less resilient.
Yeah. I mean, I love it when, like, if I'm tired and I'm doing a clinic with the therapist, it's actually quite nice because we all take turns asking questions. And then if I forget to ask something, I know one of them will think of it.
Yeah. So maybe it's actually better care.
Well, that's the thing, because if you're feeling a bit weary and you're doing it as a team, then everybody's kind of in it together. So, yeah. No, so I really believe that is, because it's a part of healthcare now, that could be a very positive aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the definitions of burnout are stopping seeing the compassion for people and your willingness to help other people and your patients and whatnot. So recognizing that is obviously very important, but that it isn't a line in the sand. It maybe it's different levels of burnout with different parts of your job, or one day you feel okay, but the next day you don't, and like knowing ourselves. So here we are in a time when you and I, like you just said, you have 50% of your time you're on call. I'm on call at least a day or two a week myself. I can predict now, if I let myself slow down and realize the pattern, when I'm going to feel really crappy, and it really is. You've worked the whole week, then you've worked the weekend, then you've worked the whole week, and God forbid you work that second weekend or there's something else.
Yeah.
We need to block out time for recovery and restoration as well. And that, yes, that's lost income if you're fee for service, but to what end? Like, is it not worth it in a way? You're a fee for service person, so I'm salaried. So people can roll their eyes at me and say I get sick time and maternity leave time and all this sort of business. But I still feel that burden of responsibility of being available to my patients.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, money doesn't buy you happiness, and it certainly doesn't bring you joy if you don't feel good.
Yeah.
And so I've really always felt like that, and that I feel very privileged anyway, the amount of money that I've made being a physician. So for me, if I really feel I need to be off, and I often will choose vacations where I can't use my phone because, I'll go somewhere that, I won't get internet access, so I'll just choose not to get a package or anything like that, so that I'm actually separated from it. Because I think that is good to have that time away, like whether it's to be in nature or whatever, just to see beauty, do something different, and fill your mind with something else.
I can't resist but allow that to be a segue into the humanities for DMNB.
Yeah.
I mean, your paintings with Mark Gilbert have been really beautiful about the experience of adolescence. And then I know his work with older patients with dementia and whatnot have been very powerful.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about humanities at DMNB and how faculty can use that?
I think the arts and humanities and medicine is going to actually grow even more. There's even national interest in it now in terms of the postgraduate and in practice piece as well. People think of it as, oh, that's nice. But I really feel there's a lot more to it than that if you really delve into it and think about the arts in a different way. The projects I've done are to really look at people's lived experience through portraiture. And I've also done another project with patients with epilepsy, and that was incredibly powerful. And we're going to have the opportunity to share that in all sorts of places. And it's given us new insight into what these families need, which we wouldn't have had before. And even though I felt I knew them well, I still learned a lot about what life's like for them. So I think that's true for us as physicians as well. We could actually use the arts with one another to explore topics that we're not super comfortable with talking about, but you can use the arts to open up a dialogue that might have been uncomfortable if it was about you personally. But if you can take, like, for example, a film clip or a piece of art or whatever it might be. I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head, but you can actually apply that and get people thinking in a little workshop format or whatever it might be to open up and share. And then often once you get people talking, they'll actually share other things as well. I've always been amazed at what people will say if you create the space to allow it.
Absolutely. So, and I've really noticed that with your patients as well, that you brought to us with that, the stories that you would tell and how important a story is in medicine to really convey a feeling or a sense of life circumstance. And there's so much more room for that in medicine now.
Right.
I say that to the students all the time. I say, this is the science of medicine, and then this is the art of medicine, because they'll say to you, how did you know to do this versus this? And an example might be like, how did you know that this was a milk allergy and not reflux? And part of it's intuition and clinical experience for sure, but it's listening to the story, and it's what we coach them in all the time, these open-ended questions, giving them space. I just taught clinical skills this morning, and it was all about the social history. And so they were saying to people, tell me about your living situation. And I timed it, and not one of them left the person more than 4 seconds to answer the question before they said, like, where do you live? Like in St. John? And so couldn't we just allow a little bit more space for that? Our students have the time. Maybe we don't always have the time.
Yeah, and I often tell the younger, not being an age, but learning process, that you have the luxury of the time and to really be present to people talking, because we do interrupt very quickly in medicine.
Yeah, maybe in podcasts too. So building relationships and having professional relationships is one thing, our personal relationships. How much does having relationships with our patients, appropriate ones, albeit, but you and I, we live in this community, we play in this community, and how does the interface of social media and just being in the grocery store contribute negatively and positively to our wellness?
I actually think in a lot of ways it can be positive, because people get to know you as a person outside of work. So they might see, like, for example, people come to the concerts I do and they'll see you there and come up and say hello after. And so they actually see you in a different role. I'm for the last 5 years, I've organised a memorial service for people who have donated their bodies for medical education and research. And it's a very special service. And just at the one we just did, somebody came up and it was one of the patient's mums, and they were so surprised to see me there because, it was a different role, to be in. And yet I think for families and patients to see you like that really humanizes you and helps them realize that you're not just a doctor. And I don't mean that in a negative way.
Giving them a long wait time.
Yeah. It's so important to realize that all of us are people and we're all human as well. And it's easy to forget that, I think, because people are so desperate and have needs. And I understand that, they get so caught up in what they need at that moment. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's a good thing for them to see who you are as a whole person.
Right. How do you think it works negatively?
Well, it feels like you're never away, really, because you see people, and
the
then
impossible
it becomes
staycation of a physician's life. Like that
right.
is just not possible.
And that idea of you don't feel like you'll ever get away. But I must say, I do think most people by far are very respectful. Like they wouldn't come up and ask you, little Johnny's having a problem right in the middle of the grocery store. So, most people are very respectful of that. And if you live in a smaller community, you are going to meet up with people. That's just the reality.
Yeah. I think that's a very big reality in St. John, and being a pediatrician of sort of childbearing age for the most part, or my kids are in school. And so I can't even you wouldn't catch me at a baby group ever, probably, because I want a bill for the 6 conversations that I've had. No, I'm just joking. But it's really is a lot. And so giving ourselves language to give us boundaries again, like, oh, that sounds very important. I do want to talk to you about that. Why don't you, have your family doctor get a referral or whatever? Do you think that comes off as rude, or if it's a quickie, you kind of do a one-off, but if it requires more thought and
No, and sometimes I'll get asked the same thing, but it's important. I mean, as a subspecialist, I need to get a referral. I can't just see people, and you're in the same boat. And so I think it's a nice way to say, we should talk about that now, but I'm not saying I wouldn't be willing, but it's not at this moment.
Yeah, well, it all depends on what you're doing too. If you're out for dinner, you're out for dinner at Italian by night with your partner, and then all of a sudden somebody comes up and pulls up their pant leg and says, I've had this rash for a week. Because people lack in that social boundary as well at times, having some language to do that, because you don't feel like you can escape, really. We did some chatting in a previous podcast about millennials and their ability to compartmentalize their lives as well, because technology has allowed our lives to be 24/7. And so also having boundaries with people's expectations of you with email and text and any tips?
So I do have a Facebook page, but it's got very limited information on it, and I don't accept friend requests from families because I don't think that's fair, and I think it crosses a boundary. It is tricky when you know people and they know you in another setting, but even with that, I've tried to keep that separate for me. So I don't post a lot of personal stuff. I use it mostly for, some events, and then occasionally some trips or to connect with family. I mean, that's usually what I use it for. But I'm not on it that much, really, because it drives me crazy. But the email thing I've tried to separate, because one of the challenges is our work email, well, especially through Dalhousie, is accessible to the public. And so people can find it. And so it's just trying to create that boundary that I don't use this for clinical work. And so I've tried to do that as well, because you can't, I mean, we're already inundated, and you need to create some way to keep it separate. So that's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, I tried a edgy out of office last time I went away and said, I don't have access to email, and I've actually blocked incoming emails while I'm away. And so if you have something to send me that I need to see, I'll return on this date. Please put it in your save box and resend at that time, which I actually got a lot of, kind of backfired. I got a lot of emails complimenting me on my my out of office, which kind of defeated the point. I was trying to not come home to 1,000 emails. And my grandfather was actually the one who, for the first time ever, tried to send me an email and got this out of office, and was completely, mortified that I would say something like this. But it was just a bit of an attempt to make people realize how their expectations are a bit much, and how can we lessen the burden of having that restorative time, but then coming back and not feeling like, oh my gosh, I had to pay for that vacation, because you have the financial implications, you have the work implications, and then you've got to work double time to make up for it. Yeah.
And it is hard, because when you go away and come back and you've got this pile of administrative work and issues to deal with, it does make you feel like, why did I do that? And so, or
worse, makes you feel like you should work while you're away.
Yeah, which is, and I've been very conscious of that, and in trying to get away, I know people can probably totally relate to this, but I've been calling in prescriptions at the airport and trying to jump on the plane, and you just, I mean, it's just stressful, trying to do that. And how do we, I've often thought I should take a day off before I start my holiday. So you actually get a day to do all these crazy things that you but that's the start of the holiday. So you get them done. But then it would just back up. And that's the problem. It never ends, I keep trying all these different strategies, but yeah.
So is it rude to have those boundaries and expectations? Is it rude to have the sign in the waiting room that says, please allow 48 to 72 hours for prescription refills? Or how can we work with our colleagues in pharmacies to say, listen, you have to do me a solid and give them 2 or 3 days worth?
And actually we've actually been just trying to find ways like that. So things like, because if I'm on the road, it's not always easy if it's a long day, to call in stuff. So I'll ask for a week, or when they fill their last refill and it says 0, they need to let me know. So there's not that pressure, to get all these prescriptions in. And so just finding ways to create a little bit of buffer time so that if you don't do it right that day, it's not the end of the world. You know what I mean? That could be done next week if need be. Yeah.
I think a lot of what we talked about today was really, it gets down to the crux of knowing yourself really well, knowing what your goals are, what your intention is, and fair enough, your limitations, and that we are but human, and what we're able to contribute to our patients. I think we've said that you have to be well to do that well, and that's okay, and we don't need to apologize for that. And so I think big themes are really about setting expectations not only for our patients, but for ourselves and our families. And then I would argue just being true to those, because I don't know about you, but like you know, like here it is, we're recording this on a Monday. I've mapped out my whole week in terms of what I want to accomplish and what I have in terms of responsibilities. But it can all fall apart when you stray from the plan.
Absolutely. And the hardest thing I find, because I'm on call half the time, I'll be in clinic and I could be interrupted, 6 times. And that delays, the day because it just keeps going. And so when the whole week's like that, sometimes it's fine, but other weeks it can be crazy with calls. And yeah, you have all this plan and it does not go to plan. So it's like...
Well, and it's the perfect plan, right? Because we're perfectionists. And if you're going to train for that triathlon, then you need to do this much, and that's happening at this time.
Yeah. So when it doesn't go to plan and you think, oh, I set aside this time to do this and this and this, and now I don't have it because something else happened. And that is the nature of medicine, because it doesn't go to plan. Yeah.
So then enters the compassion that we reserve in spades for our patients, that we extend to ourselves a little bit to just chill out a little bit and realize that perfect plan is the manual we've created for ourselves that nobody could probably follow.
That's right.
Right?
Well, I mean, we all have such high expectations. Yeah. I think I can get a lot of stuff done in a fairly short amount of time, which is, I feel very blessed with that. But at the same time, if things go haywire, then just being gentle on yourself and say, well, I didn't get that done today, but that one can be put off. I mean, I think we definitely need to be gentler on ourselves. And like I said earlier, that notion of this is good enough. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not brilliant, it's good enough.
Yeah, good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So I hope everybody out there listening feels like we tackled some of the important concepts around wellness and averting burnout and frankly, just being compassionate with ourselves. And thank you very much, Wendy, for coming to talk about particularly the humanities and the beauty of the arts as it pertains to medicine and all of your lovely interests and all the stuff you do get done, because you have really been masterful of a lot of things in your life, and you're just a lovely person to know. So thanks very much for coming here today.
Thank you.